The mist rises from Anglesey, dark waters as dawn breaks reluctantly over this Welsh island, where history divided itself into before and after. You stand among standing stones worn by 2,000 years of wind and rain, each one a silent witness to an annihilation Rome considered necessary. These rocks remember something that the classical writers could quite articulate, but made them determined to erase completely. Not convert, not integrate, erase. The difference matters. It is 60 CE when the Roman legions arrive under Suetonius Paulinus. The island is remote enough to feel like the world's edge, close enough to mainland Wales to serve as the Druidic heartland. The historian Tacitus records what he heard from those present. Imagine it through his words: groves that ran red with blood, altars soaked in human offerings, white-robed Druids calling down curses so potent that Roman soldiers froze in terror. The legions knew that something existed here worth fearing, something that required not occupation but obliteration. The destruction was thorough. Temples were burned. Sacred groves were cut down. The Druids themselves were hunted down and executed. But Tacitus notes something stranger. The curses. The Druids apparently understood they were dying and cursed their killers with knowledge that reportedly haunted Roman soldiers for the rest of their lives. What kind of curse works across decades? What kind of priesthood can wound an empire through words spoken as they die? On this island, Rome destroyed something so completely that 2,000 years later, we still don't know what we lost. The archaeological record around Anglesey is remarkable for what it contains and what it doesn't. Massive ritual deposits in lakes and marshes, weapons deliberately broken and sunk as offerings, gold and silver deliberately hidden, human remains positioned in patterns that suggest ceremony rather than violence. These aren't the remnants of a conquered people, but of a priesthood carefully destroying their own sacred objects to prevent desecration, storing them in water where they believed they remain protected. The lake bottoms become museums of resistance. But of the Druids themselves, there are no temples like those of Rome, no carved inscriptions, no written records, no architectural monuments proclaiming their existence. Nothing that Rome could point to and say, this is what we destroyed. The Druids left almost no material trace because they didn't work in stone. They worked in consciousness, in words, in knowledge passed through memory rather than written on parchment, in traditions maintained through personal presence rather than institutional structure. This becomes crucial. Rome, which encountered nearly every religion the Mediterranean world offered, adapted, absorbed, and integrated them. The gods of conquered territories received Roman names and sanctuary within the pantheon. But the Druids could be adapted. Something about their structure, their power, their way of operating meant Rome saw them as fundamentally incompatible with imperial order. The decision was just military, it was ideological. These weren't merely priests Rome needed to subordinate. They were a form of consciousness, a way of understanding reality, that Rome recognized as threatening. The standing stones of Anglesey hold this mystery. Why was elimination preferable to incorporation? What did the Druids represent that Rome, master of conquest and absorption, chose instead to erase from history? The mist swirls, the stones stand. The question remains. But consciousness can't be conquered. Ideas can't be burned completely. What Rome tried to destroy in Anglesey continued living across the Irish Sea and Ireland, the one Celtic land Rome never conquered. Geography saved what the legions tried to murder. Ireland became the last refuge for a wisdom tradition that had flourished from the Atlantic to Anatolia before Roman swords began their systematic work. The Druids vanished, but their knowledge survived in unexpected forms. The Irish Fillid poet, seers who inherited fragments of Druidic teaching, became living libraries. These weren't simple poets. They were consciousness technicians, trained for more than a decade to memorize not just poems but genealogies spanning centuries. Laws governing everything from the proper way to keep bees to the correct compensation owed for every conceivable injury, and histories that had to be recited perfectly or the recitation itself became magically ineffective. The training was legendary for its severity. A student would memorize hundreds of stories, each one compressed to its essential form using techniques that turned the entire body into memory. The rhythm of walking matched the rhythm of verses. Specific locations triggered specific information clusters. Metaphors encoded complicated concepts so completely that hearing them was like downloading entire philosophical systems into consciousness. A master Philid could recite narratives that took 12 hours to deliver completely. The Tefin Ireland's national epic required half a night just to tell it through. In Ireland, memories became stronger than armies, preserving what swords tried to destroy. The complete genealogies of Ireland took 3 days and nights of continuous recitation, 3 days, during which the reciter's consciousness had to remain in a precise state, alert enough to remember perfectly, yet flowing enough to handle the extraordinary complexity. Linguistic analysis of surviving Irish reveals something remarkable. Certain phrases preserve Indo-European roots older than Sanskrit, words that haven't changed in 3,000 years, language that maintains continuous connection reaching back to prehistoric shamanism. The tradition literally preserved itself through the sound of words, maintaining consciousness patterns across millennia. When Christianity arrived in Ireland, something remarkable happened. Rather than being destroyed like continental Druidism, the tradition adapted. Christian monks, many descended from Druids themselves, preserved pagan knowledge in coded forms. You can find it in medieval manuscripts, spells hidden in the margins, incantations barely Christianized, Druidic protection formulae incorporated into prayers. The monks understood that some knowledge was too valuable to lose, too true to permit destruction, so they hid it, embedded it in Christian texts, made it invisible to those not trained to see it. The medieval Irish monasteries became unexpected repositories for pre-Christian knowledge. Not from any ecclesiastical decision, but from monks' personal conviction that wisdom shouldn't disappear just because the politics changed. The memory techniques that preserved Druidic tradition never stopped being used. They were applied to Christian texts, yes, but the methods, the consciousness states required. The entire technology of memorization remained intact. The form changed. The substance persisted. The sacred knowledge of the Druids didn't die in Ireland, it transformed, it hid. It waited through centuries for the moment when it could emerge again, in forms people would recognize. What we know about the living Druids comes from the accounts of classical writers who encountered them before Anglesey, before the systematic destruction. The historians and geographers who met Druids and wrote about them were remarkable for their respect, and that respect itself speaks volumes. These were not men prone to admiring barbarians, yet Druids commanded their admiration. Caesar, conquering Gaul and encountering Druidic societies, recorded something that puzzled him deeply. The Druids, he observed, studied for 20 years, during which they memorized verses numbering in the thousands. Caesar noted with apparent frustration that despite knowing Greek letters and being perfectly capable of writing, they refused to commit sacred knowledge to text. Why? They claimed the practice of writing would weaken memory, that the commitment to text would diminish the transformation required to internalize true knowledge. But there was something else. Writing created permanence. Writing created property. Writing could be conquered and destroyed. Memory spread across living minds, lived in ways writing never could. Even Romans, who dismissed most barbarians as savages, admitted that Druids possessed wisdom that unsettled them. Posidonius, the Greek geographer, described the Druidic class structure in detail that later sources largely confirmed. 3 hierarchies: the Druids themselves, who were philosophers and judges and teachers; the Vates, prophets and ritualists who performed divination and conducted ceremony; and the bards, historians and praise, poets who maintained genealogies and composed verses. Each wielded different aspects of spiritual and political power. The Druid was the thinker. The Vates was the connector to the unseen. The bard was the memory keeper and the shaper of reputation. Together they formed a priesthood that didn't need temples or written scripture to maintain absolute cultural authority. Other Roman observers noted something extraordinary. The Druids could stop battles simply through their presence. An approaching conflict would halt when a Druid stepped between the armies. Something about their being carried such authority that warriors would lay down weapons. How do you explain this, except through recognition that Druids wielded a form of power that transcended the physical? That their authority came from somewhere the rational mind couldn't quite locate. Greek philosophers comparing the Druids to Eastern magi and Egyptian priests suggested they possessed genuine esoteric knowledge rather than mere superstition. These weren't simple shamans. These were philosophers equivalent in status to the intellectual elite of the Mediterranean world. They studied cosmology, they understood mathematics encoded in the stars. They possessed medical knowledge that worked, they used herbs that healed, but they also understood something about consciousness itself, about how properly spoken words could alter reality, how ritual action at the right time could manifest specific consequences. The Druids unified Celtic resistance, not through coercion, but through spiritual authority that transcended tribal boundaries. This frightened Rome more than any military force could have, a priesthood whose power didn't depend on legions or fortifications or administrative structure could never be controlled. They had to be destroyed, completely, not pacified, not absorbed, not incorporated, removed from history itself, if possible. The classical writers' respect for Druidic wisdom stands as testimony that Rome understood. This wasn't superstition. This was a form of knowledge and power operating on different principles than the empire recognized. The physical center of Druidic power was the Nemeton, the sacred grove. Not a temple built by human hands, but a natural space cultivated over generations to become a living cathedral where divinity itself resided in the bark and leaf and soil. These places existed across Celtic lands, Amain Macha in Ulster with its massive circular temple structure, Gornay-sur, a rond in Gaul where thousands of sacrificed weapons were discovered arranged with ritualistic precision, and the shores of Lake Nuchel where ritual deposits spanned centuries of continuous practice. The Celtic worldview understood divinity differently than Mediterranean religions. The gods didn't live in distant Olympus or in temples built as their homes. They lived in nature itself. Mountains were sleeping deities. Rivers were goddesses flowing through the land. Trees held consciousness. The entire landscape was ensouled. Building a temple in the Mediterranean sense would actually violate this understanding. It would separate from profane. The Nemeton, by contrast, was a place where sacred and profane already existed in perfect unity. In groves where gods lived in bark and leaf, Druids performed mysteries that required no temples because the forest itself was divine. Archaeological surveys reveal that these groves were carefully cultivated. Specific tree configurations created acoustic properties that would have transformed the human voice, making whispered speech carry in impossible ways. Light filtered through leaves in patterns that induced altered consciousness. The arrangement of spaces created natural resonance chambers. Some researchers suggest that certain trees, possibly specific oak species, released psychoactive compounds into the air. The Nemeton wasn't crude or random. It was sophisticated engineering disguised as nature. Pollen analysis around archaeological sites confirms that specific tree arrangements persisted across centuries. Oak species were overwhelmingly predominant. The oak became the Druid's tree. The word Druid possibly derives from the Celtic word for oak. In certain arrangements, specific groves would have produced particular acoustic and atmospheric effects. The design was reproducible. The effect was reliable. These were technologies for consciousness modification, expressed through landscape cultivation. The place name evidence across Europe reveals how extensive the Nemeton system was. Hundreds of locations from Gaul to Britain contain Nemeton in their names, mapping a lost sacred geography: Nemetobriga, Nemetodurum, Drumeton. Each one a former sacred center, each name preserving memory of places where the invisible world intersected with the visible. The Nemetons functioned as more than religious centers. They served as universities where knowledge was preserved and transmitted. They were courts where justice was administered according to principles beyond mere human law, divine law interpreted through Druidic understanding. They were neutral ground where warring tribes could meet under sacred protection, making Druids simultaneously priests and international diplomats, whose person was sacred and inviolable, even between enemies. The Romans understood this. The Nemeton's power came not from fortification or military strength, but from collective recognition of its sanctity. Remove the trees, execute the Druids, and the Nemeton became just woodland. The power wasn't in the place itself, but in the consciousness that held it sacred. This is perhaps why Rome tried so thoroughly to destroy every aspect of Druidic culture. They recognized that a belief system maintained in consciousness, rather than in stone, could resurrect itself if any living person maintained the knowledge. The groves still exist. Most are just forest now. But in certain places, sensitive visitors still report experiencing phenomena, voices in the wind that seem to speak meaning, sensations of presence, and the curious certainty that something essential was lost from these places 2,000 years ago. Something that might, if properly remembered, return. Somewhere in the dim memory of Irish tradition exists a script where trees themselves are letters. Each of the 20 characters corresponds to a specific tree, transforming the act of writing into communion with the natural world and the cosmic forces each tree embodies. The Ogham script, the mysteries call it the Bethlehisnenia, the birth letters of language itself. Each tree carries not just a sound, but a complete constellation of meaning, healing properties, seasonal correspondences, connections to specific deities, and secret knowledge accessible only to those trained in the language of wood. Each tree was a letter, each forest a library, and those who could read the woods possessed the alphabet of creation itself. The surviving Ogham stones scattered across Ireland and Britain mark boundaries and graves, most of them simple declarations of ownership or memorial, but some contain inscriptions that refuse to decode through ordinary linguistic methods. The messages exist in layers. To the untrained eye, meaningless markings. To the initiated, perhaps astronomical calendars encoded in stone. Perhaps rituals preserved in symbolic form. Perhaps doorways into knowledge the conscious mind could consciously translate. The Book of Ballymote, a medieval Irish manuscript, preserves information about Ogham's secret forms that reveal its true purpose extended far beyond simple writing. Finger Ogham traced silently on the hand allowed communication between Druids across distances, without speaking, creating a vocabulary visible only to trained practitioners. Nose Ogham gestured near the face in specific positions, allowed absolute secrecy even surrounded by listeners. Battlefield Ogham for military communication during combat, when spoken words would be useless. These weren't practical aids for an ancient society. These were consciousness technologies, methods for transmitting information that bypassed normal linguistic channels and operated on levels only the initiated could perceive. Each character in the Ogham alphabet carried associations reaching into Celtic cosmology and Druidic philosophy. The birch represented new beginnings and purification, and was inscribed on the wands of healers. The oak was the Druid S tree, representing stability and the connection between worlds. The ash bridged the material and spiritual realms. The world tree in many traditions. The alder connected to water mysteries and the undersea otherworld. The willow, sacred to poets, granted the gift of eloquence and prophecy. Walking through an Ogham, trained consciousness was walking through a landscape where every feature whispered secrets to those who could listen. Modern scholars debate whether Ogham preserved authentic Druidic knowledge or was a later invention. Some argue it emerged in the first centuries of the Christian era, after Druidic destruction, created as a system to preserve older teaching. Others, like Robert Graves, propose that Ogham encoded a sacred calendar and goddess mythology, so specifically that its structure could have emerged accidentally. The theory remains controversial, but the persistence of the same associations across multiple independent sources suggests something real beneath the speculation. Archaeological discoveries continue revealing Ogham's uses beyond writing. Inscriptions in caves and on ritual objects suggest utilization we don't fully understand. In 1994, an Ogham stone was discovered in County Cork, with markings that specialists could place in any known Ogham system. Older, different tradition. A system lost except for this single example. The mystery persists. The alphabet of creation guards its deepest meanings carefully. In modern Celtic spirituality, practitioners train to read Ogham as divination, drawing stones from bags and interpreting their meanings through traditional associations. This practice, dismissed by scholars as romantic invention, might actually preserve training methods Druids used. The randomness of selection combined with the discipline of interpretation forces consciousness into specific states. The meditation required to interpret meaning might open channels to intuitive knowledge. The tool might be ancient, even if the modern application is recent. High above a main matcha, the ancient royal centre of Ulster, the sky moves according to patterns, the Druids tracked with extraordinary precision. The stars wheeled overhead year after year in cycles, so regular they could be predicted. The Druids watched. They learned. They built monuments aligned to track celestial events. They created calendars that encoded astronomical knowledge in religious form. The universe revealed itself to those patient enough to observe and skilled enough to understand the language of the heavens. While Rome counted days, Druids counted the breath of the cosmos and knew when the heavens would shift before emperors knew their own fate. The Coligny calendar, a bronze tablet discovered in France, represents a sophisticated lunisolar calendar more accurate than the Roman system Rome was simultaneously promoting. The tablet displays a complex 13-month year with intercalary months, precisely tracking lunar cycles while maintaining alignment with solar seasons. The mathematical precision visible in this single artifact proves Druidic astronomical knowledge was genuine, verifiable, and sophisticated far beyond what Rome acknowledged. It is the kind of calendar you only develop through generations of careful observation, through years of recording discrepancies and gradually refining understanding, through commitment to accuracy that prioritizes truth over convenience. The eightfold Celtic year divided the cosmos into seasons, beyond the simple four that later European culture would adopt. Samhain marked the boundary between life and death when the otherworld invaded the material realm. Imbolc, in early spring, signaled awakening and renewal. Beltane, beginning of summer, was the dangerous festival of purification and fire. Lugnasad, the first harvest, honored the god Lugh and thanked the land for its bounty. Between these major festivals came the solstices and equinoxes, making 8 turning points that marked not just agricultural time, but cosmic alignment. Each festival wasn't merely religious, but astronomical, timed to actual celestial events, happening when the sun reached specific points in its annual journey. Archaeological investigation of sites like Newgrange, older than Stonehenge, and the Egyptian pyramids demonstrates precision solar alignments that required generations of observation to achieve. The passage entrance aligns so precisely with the winter solstice sunrise that the chamber illuminates only during those few critical days. Such accuracy doesn't happen through accident or superstition. It emerges from systematic observation, mathematical calculation, and engineering sophistication. The Druids, or their predecessors, possessed the knowledge to create such monuments. They understood the cosmos well enough to predict celestial events before they occurred. Medieval Irish texts contain references to Druids drawing down the moon and stopping the sun. Historians dismiss these as magical fantasy, but they might reference actual astronomical observations. Drawing down the moon might describe predicting lunar eclipses and the complex mathematics required. Stopping the sun might reference precise observation of the solstice moment, when the sun appears to halt in its annual journey before reversing direction. The language is metaphorical, but the underlying observations are real. Druids lived in relationship with celestial rhythms, understanding their role in maintaining cosmic order. This astronomical knowledge granted Druids unique temporal power. Controlling the calendar meant controlling agriculture. The right planting time meant the difference between abundance and famine. Knowing when to celebrate festivals meant knowing when cosmic forces were most accessible. In a society dependent on seasonal cycles, whoever controlled time controlled everything. The Druids' ability to predict celestial events wasn't magic. It was superior information operating through magical framework. The skull of a prehistoric human shows evidence of trephination brain surgery. The bone has healed. The patient survived. Thousands of years before the Roman surgical instruments that Europe would later celebrate, someone possessed knowledge to cut through bone, access the brain itself, and close the wound without killing the patient. This suggests surgical knowledge passing through generations, techniques refined through experience, understanding of anatomy, and procedure far more advanced than popular history acknowledges. The Druids inherited this tradition, refined it, built upon it. In Druid healing, the boundary between medicine and magic dissolved because they understood that belief itself was the most powerful cure. Pliny recorded the famous or infamous account of Druids harvesting mistletoe with golden sickles on the 6th day of the moon. The ritual precision Pliny described seems excessive until you understand the layers operating simultaneously. Mistletoe genuinely possesses pharmacological properties, affecting blood pressure. The specific lunar timing might correlate with the plant's chemical composition changing at different lunar phases. The golden sickle prevents iron oxidation that might render the herb inert. The ceremony creates psychological state, enabling the body's healing systems to activate. Superstition and science aren't contradictory here. They're complementary approaches to activating consciousness, states facilitating healing. Archaeological evidence of sophisticated medical knowledge appears throughout Celtic territories. Complex bone settings suggest orthopedic understanding. Surgical instruments of surprising delicacy indicate specialized tools for specific procedures. Most remarkably, the trephined skulls suggest not just successful surgery, but understanding of when surgery would help versus harm. The survival rate of these ancient procedures suggests careful patient selection and proper technique. Irish medical manuscripts like the Book of the O'Hickeys preserve healing traditions, carrying authentic archaic elements, specific herbs for specific conditions, but always combined with incantations. The words carry meaning beyond linguistic content. The rhythm of the incantation might induce the exact brain state required for the body to activate healing responses. The herb provides chemical support. The ritual provides psychological and spiritual activation. A combination produces effects neither component alone could achieve. Sacred springs and healing wells across Ireland contain votive offerings. Small metal pieces, shaped like diseased body parts, a lead ear for hearing problems, a bronze hand for paralysis, a stone carved as diseased intestines. Thousands of these offerings accumulated at specific sites over centuries. They represent patients seeking miraculous healing, leaving these tokens as prayers or offerings in exchange for cure. The tradition survived Christianization, with Christian prayers replacing Druidic invocations, but the location remaining identical. The same spring that cured through Druidic ritual cures through Christian prayer. The place itself holds power independently of whatever theology explains it. Certain Druidic medical practices directly preceded discovery of the remedies by centuries. Willow bark contains salicylic acid. Aspirin's precursor, Druids used willow bark for pain reduction and fever management. Foxglove contains digitalis compounds that regulate heartbeat. Druids used it for heart conditions. Yarrow promotes blood clotting and is vulnerary for wounds. Druids knew it. These weren't lucky guesses, were systematic discoveries tested across generations and preserved through apprenticeship training. The Druids possessed legitimate pharmaceutical knowledge existing within spiritual framework that also worked psychologically. In the Celtic understanding, words possess creative and destructive power when spoken with proper intention, in proper form, at proper time. The universe doesn't simply exist as an inert stage upon which events occur. The universe is participatory, responsive to consciousness, shaped by formal utterance. This understanding transforms language from mere communication tool into cosmic technology. Properly spoken words don't just describe reality, they alter it. When a druid spoke ritual words, reality itself listened, and mountains moved, seas parted, or kingdoms fell, depending on the speaker's will. The concept of the guise represents this principle concretely. A guise is a ritual taboo or prohibition. And when a druid placed a guise on someone, violation didn't result in punishment administered by the priest. Violation produced automatic cosmic consequences. Break the guise and specific doom followed inevitably. The enforcement wasn't social or theological, was automatically cosmic. The universe itself enforced sacred prohibition. This created binding power more absolute than any law code. Kings couldn't argue with Geasa, couldn't negotiate their terms, could only accept them or face doom. Irish legends repeatedly describe Druids' words manifesting physically. A Druid raises mists that blanket an entire army, making them unable to locate their enemies. A Druid creates barriers of fire blocking passage. A Druid's satirical verse literally causes boils to erupt on a king's skin, forcing him to abdicate since blemished kings couldn't rule. Are these metaphors or descriptions of psychological effects so powerful they seem physical? Or something else entirely, genuine command of forces modern consciousness can't quite classify? Linguistic analysis reveals that certain Irish legal and poetic terms preserve Indo-European roots related to binding and loosing, words that etymologically connect language to magical constraint. The deep structure of the language itself might encode principles governing reality. Speaking certain sentences in certain ways wouldn't just move air and sound, would activate principles embedded in language's original structure. The Druids' power would come from understanding language as technology for reshaping reality. Naming granted ultimate control by giving someone their true name at birth or coronation for kings. The Druid gave them their fate. The true name contained destiny. It described the person's essential nature and predetermined purpose. King lists include royal names that seem absurdly grandiose until you understand each name predicted the king's reign and ultimate fate. The Druids' capacity to perceive or create true names represented the deepest power, control over another's fundamental nature. 3 levels of Druidic speech existed. Ordinary communication functioned as basic exchange of information. Ritual declaration, spoken in proper form at proper time, altered social reality. Announcing war meant war began. Pronouncing judgment meant judgment took effect. Declaring someone cursed meant they were cursed. The speaking itself created change. Divine speech, 3rd level, supposedly commanded natural forces directly. The Druid speaking divine utterance, words from outside ordinary consciousness, often channeled through trance or possession, could create effects that seemed impossible. The boundaries between these levels weren't absolute. A particularly profound ordinary statement might produce ritual effects. A ritual statement delivered with divine inspiration might reshape reality completely. This tradition of word power survived Christianization. Medieval Irish law preserved the poet's power to destroy through satire. Though technically Christian, poets retained legal authority to damage reputations. Financial compensation owed if satire was unjustified. But the satire itself acknowledged as legitimate weapon. The Druidic word magic lived on in poetry. The sacred speech transformed, but didn't disappear. The Celtic Otherworld wasn't heaven. It wasn't hell. It wasn't the afterlife in the way later religions conceived it. It was something simultaneously more complex and more tangible, a parallel realm coexisting with material reality, separated not by death but by planes of perception. You could theoretically visit and return. Mortals could fall into it accidentally. Gods regularly invaded it. Boundaries between worlds remained permeable for those who knew how to find the passages. Just beyond the morning mist lay kingdoms more real than Rome, where gods feasted, heroes battled, and time meant nothing. The Celtic language had multiple names for these realms, each capturing different aspects of the same impossible geography. Tur Arna Anargend, the land of youth, where aging didn't occur and centuries passed as days. Magmel, the plain of delight, where sorrow existed nowhere and only joy persisted eternally. Amain Ablak, the island of apples, where sacred fruit granted immortality. Turner Grantine, the land of the sun, the direction west held particular significance. Each name described one facet of the same otherworldly realm that existed in multiple forms simultaneously. Or perhaps mortals perceiving it differently, based on spiritual readiness, shaped what they encountered. Ritual shafts discovered across Celtic lands descend steeply into earth, sometimes dozens of meters, opening to underground chambers far too elaborate to serve practical purposes. Archaeological evidence suggests deliberate deposition in these depths, weapons, jewelry, food, and human remains positioned ritually. Not burials in conventional sense, but offerings. Gifts sent to otherworld inhabitants, acknowledgement that something existed below that deserved respect and appeasement. The practices spanned centuries. The deposition patterns remained consistent. The belief that these depths connected to other realms wasn't momentary fancy, was continuous practice reflecting genuine cultural certainty. Irish Imrama voyage tales describe navigation through otherworldly geography with their own peculiar logic. Islands appearing and disappearing from mist, currents carrying boats to unexpected destinations. Some islands existed in constant daylight, while nearby waters remained perpetually dark. Time flowed differently in each location. A crew spending what seemed like a single night would return to find years had passed, or impossible. Spend a year only to discover one day had passed in the mortal realm. The other world didn't follow material reality's temporal rules. The thin places, coal thin, where worlds touched most directly were marked specifically. Standing stones indicated these junctures. Sacred springs bubbling from earth carried otherworld water. City mounds, supposedly dwelling places of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the god people, who retreated to hidden kingdoms, remained visible but unreachable. You could walk past a city daily for years without entering it, but under correct conditions, the right time, the right consciousness state, the right ritual passage became possible. The other world wasn't merely spiritual or psychological. It possessed its own geography, inhabitants, and politics that directly affected the mortal realm. When gods fought in the otherworld, humans experienced consequences. When the otherworld queen took a mortal lover, his tribe gained her favor or suffered her wrath, depending on circumstances. The otherworld wasn't separate from this world, like medieval heaven was separate from earth. The otherworld was the hidden dimension of this world. Same location, different frequency. Same place access through different consciousness than ordinary perception allows. This worldview influenced Celtic behavior profoundly. The casual courage of Celtic warriors, repeatedly noted by Roman observers, wasn't just cultural bravado. It emerged from conviction that death was transition rather than ending. The ecological practices that preserved forests and waters came from understanding that these weren't just resources but lived places deserving respect. The extreme justice systems with compensation for every conceivable injury reflected belief that all debts persisted across material and other world. The other world wasn't theoretical construct, but lived geography that shaped real behavior. They arrived from 4 mythical cities in the north carrying 4 treasures: the sword of Nuada that never missed its target, the spear of Lu that always ensured victory, the cauldron of Dagda that never emptied, and the stone of destiny that cried out when the true king sat upon it. The Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, represented not just gods, but a complete civilization of divine beings who ruled Ireland before retreating to the otherworld. They weren't distant deities ignoring human affairs from celestial distance. They were active presences intervening constantly in mortal existence. They ruled before history began, retreated but never left, and from their hidden kingdoms still watch and occasionally interfere with mortal ambitions. Each society was believed to contain an underground kingdom, complete with palaces and inhabitants who lived by different rules than the surface world. The Tuatha Dé Danann didn't disappear. They transformed, became invisible, retreated to realms accessible primarily through death or ritual technique. But accessibility, though difficult, remained possible. Mortals could visit if invited or if they navigated the passages correctly. More commonly, the Tuatha Dé Danann visited the mortal world, taking human form, establishing relationships, interfering in royal succession. Copper Age and Bronze Age artifacts, matching the described treasures, exist in archaeological record. Bronze weapons of extraordinary craftsmanship, sacred cauldrons of remarkable size and decoration. Could these legends preserve cultural memories of earlier populations? Could the Tuatha Dé Danann represent mythologized memories of earlier inhabitants, perhaps the Neolithic or Copper Age peoples, who impressed later Celtic populations with their sophisticated technology? The theory remains speculative, but the persistence of specific artifact descriptions through oral tradition suggests kernels of genuine memory encoded in mythology. Each of the Tuatha Dé Danann possessed distinct identity and portfolio. Love, the multi-skilled god, master of all arts and crafts. Nuada, whose lost hand was replaced with a silver prosthetic by the god of medicine. Brigid, the triple goddess, smith, healer, and poet, representing the 3 pillars of Celtic knowledge. Dagda, the father god whose cauldron ensured eternal plenty. Ogma, the god of eloquence and poetry. Manan, the sea god who rode between worlds. Each maintained distinct personality and interests, and each could manifest in human form to interact directly with mortals. The god-human relationships weren't purely mythological. Medieval Irish genealogies traced royal lineages directly to the Tuatha Dé Danann. Kings claimed divine ancestry. Sovereignty itself was granted by the goddess or god with whom the king established relationship. Political power in Celtic societies was literally supernatural in origin. This wasn't allegorical or poetic. was understood as literal fact. The gods maintained active interest in human politics because the fates of human and divine realms remained intertwined. Christianity transformed these beings, but never fully eradicated belief in them. Gods became fairies, diminished in the narrative structure, but never quite eliminated from belief systems. Medieval folklore collections from Ireland show continuous tradition of otherworld encounters extending into the 20th century. Farmers encountering otherworld beings, travellers lost and guided by fairy folk, children taken by the Stoi Day. The Tuatha De Danann survived through transformation, were no longer worshipped formally, but remained present in cultural consciousness as active supernatural forces. The pathways between worlds were real if invisible. Multiple methods existed for crossing the threshold. Physical death was one, though not the only one. Ritual invitation from otherworld beings granted access. Accidental stumbling into thin places opened doorways. But direct technique, through training, through psychoactive substances, through deliberate consciousness manipulation, allowed conscious navigation of the passage. Every journey to the otherworld carried the same warning: you may return, but you will never again be who you were. The legendary journeys follow consistent patterns suggesting not mere fantasy, but mapped territories. Oyasen's visit to Turtana Unji appears as brief pleasure lasting days. On returning to mortal realm, 300 years have passed. His friends are dust, his land is unrecognizable. The Christianity of the new era rejects his pagan identity. He becomes anachronism in his own homeland, representing a world that cannot coexist with the new order. The tale isn't just romantic, it's commentary on consciousness transformation. You go to the other world and return, but the world waiting for you has moved forward. You belong nowhere. Cormac's visit to Manann's hidden kingdom follows similar pattern. The god offers hospitality, provides magical feast. The mortal enjoys experiences impossible in regular existence, but returning requires accepting specific conditions. Drinking from the god's cup grants memory of the journey. Without drinking, the mortal would forget everything and be unable to recount the experience. Why this restriction? Why block memory, unless the experience was so profound that normal consciousness couldn't integrate it? The tale suggests that otherworld journeys genuinely alter consciousness, direct experience of other planes. The return to ordinary reality requires psychological processing that might take lifetimes to complete. Bran's voyage to the Island of Women offers different teaching. His crew remains for what seems like a year, indulging in perfect pleasure. One sailor, growing homesick, convinces others to return. But when they reach the Irish coast, centuries have passed. The sailor touching Irish soil crumbles to dust, unable to exist in the mortal realm after extended otherworld exposure. The tale teaches that extended immersion in otherworld changes the soul fundamentally. Return becomes impossible not through physical obstruction, but through incompatibility. The otherworld experience makes re-entry into ordinary reality lethal. Vision poetry preserved in Irish literature describes otherworld journeys undertaken purely mentally. Druids or saints described elaborate journeys, visiting multiple otherworld locations, encountering divine beings, receiving teachings, while their bodies remained in meditation. The digital du Chenaib, inspiration between the hands, represents one technique. A druid would compose verse while in trance state, receiving inspiration that seemed to come from beyond ordinary consciousness. The visions weren't hallucinations, were experienced as genuine journeys to real places. Archaeological evidence hints at ritual practices designed to induce otherworld journeys. Sensory deprivation in certain caves. Archaeological deposits suggesting the consumption of psychoactive substances in ritual contexts. Extreme physical ordeals, all consistent with shamanic techniques, culturally recognized as gateway to non-ordinary consciousness. The otherworld journey formula appears globally: achieve altered state, navigate symbolic geography, receive teaching or power, return transformed. Certain locations maintained reputations as traditional gateways: specific caves, mountain peaks, islands, remote locations where ordinary reality seemed thin and otherworld presence felt strong. Some places retained these associations into modern times, with local populations continuing to consider them dangerous or sacred. The accumulated belief, across centuries, suggests something real beyond mere folklore. Perhaps genuine locations where geographic features or subtle environmental factors genuinely do seem to facilitate altered consciousness. Twice yearly, the boundaries between worlds dissolved completely. At these moments, the other world wasn't distant realm requiring special access, was immediately adjacent. The hidden interpenetrated the visible. The divine walked openly beside the mundane. To Celtic people, these thin times were as predictable as seasons, as real as rainfall, and as demanding of proper response. Twice each year, the doors between worlds swung fully open, and for those nights, the living and dead, mortal and immortal, walked the same roads. Samhain November 1st marked the Celtic year's end and beginning. The boundary between years became also boundary between worlds. The pastoral year ended. Flocks were brought down from summer pastures, herds were culled. The dead returned, their earthen mounds opened. Their inhabitants seedy who were also the other world, dead emerged into the visible world. The living and dead walked the same roads. Kings had to protect themselves from supernatural forces. Children were at risk of abduction by fairy folk. The basic rules of reality suspended for the night. Archaeological evidence shows Samhain was marked by massive communal gatherings at sacred sites. Bonfires blazed. Ritual deposits were made into water and earth as offerings to returning spirits. The practice wasn't peripheral superstition, but central to Celtic religious calendar. The community recognized that Samhain existed outside normal time, behaved accordingly, made offerings, performed protections, acknowledged the danger and power of thinness threshold. Beltane, May 1st, created inverse Samhain, where Samhain emphasized death and return of the dead. Beltane emphasized fertility, sexuality, and dangerous wild forces. The festival fell between pasturing seasons, marking passage from winter to summer. Bonfires were lit, possibly cattle were driven between them as purification. The sexual unions encouraged during Beltane carried semi-official status. A person could claim immunity from normal paternity laws if conception occurred during Beltane. The festival explicitly invited chaos, sexuality, and crossing of normal boundaries. The quarter days between these major festivals, Imbolc in February and Lughnasadh in August, created eightfold divisions of the year, creating multiple thin times. Each festival reopened the doorway partially. Each allowed renewed contact between worlds. Each required specific ritual responses to maintain balance between realms. Christian conversion adapted rather than suppressed these beliefs. Samhain became All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day managed through Christian framework. The dead still recurned, still required recognition, still possessed dangerous power, but now they were Christian dead, could be prayed for. Requiem masses were sung. The theology changed, but the practice persisted. The veil grew thin on the same date. The living still encountered supernatural forces, still required protection. The forms transformed. The substance maintained remarkable continuity. Modern Celtic communities retain these traditions in modified forms. On Samhain, people still leave offerings, still observe protective practices, still avoid certain locations after dark, still tell stories of otherworld encounters happening specifically on Samhain night. The belief persists, though the institutional religious authority supporting it vanished centuries ago. Cultural memory proves more durable than formal religion. The landscape itself seems to remember when worlds touch. Certain researchers propose that Samhain and Beltane didn't create thin places, but rather aligned with genuine environmental or astronomical phenomena. Perhaps the Earth's magnetic field genuinely fluctuates at these times. Perhaps certain plants' psychoactive properties peak at specific seasons. Perhaps astronomical alignments create conditions enabling expanded consciousness. The scientific evidence remains elusive, but the cultural consistency across centuries and across Celtic populations worldwide suggests something real beneath the traditions. At 17 years old, a single warrior held the armies of Ireland at a ford and didn't break, didn't retreat, didn't accept defeat until age and magic combined could finally lay him low. Si Tulane, the Hound of Culan, represents something Ireland would never forget. The warrior who transcended humanity through will and training and the willingness to accept a doom he could foresee, but not escape. His story encodes not just Iron Age warrior culture, but druidic initiation, mysteries disguised within an epic narrative. At 17, He held the armies of Ireland single-handedly at a 4D, not because he was brave, but because he had become something that wasn't quite human anymore. The transformation began early. Born Setanta, the boy was marked for greatness from childhood, trained simultaneously in warfare by male champions and in wisdom by priestesses. The duality of his education, physical prowess, and spiritual knowledge created a being functioning at different consciousness levels than ordinary warriors. He could fight with supernatural strength. He could also perceive the magical dimensions of conflict that other warriors couldn't access. The moment of his true transformation came when he killed the Smith Culan's guardian dog and took its place in service, receiving the name C2 Chulan, Hound of Culan. The sacrifice was deliberate. The warrior accepted obligation to the smith, but more profoundly, accepted the dog's role as threshold guardian. He became liminal being, no longer purely human, not quite divine. Existing in the liminal space where mortals touched the otherworld, his training extended to Alba, Scotland, where the warrior woman Scat Thatch taught him supernatural combat techniques. The Ga'i Bolga, the terrible spear that killed with 30 barbs that expanded inside the victim, ensuring death, but also knowledge, the ability to fight multiple opponents simultaneously, the capacity to exist in trance during combat, yet remain absolutely lethal. The training transformed him from skilled warrior into magical weapon that could function independently of normal consciousness. The Reastrad, the warp spasm, represents the external manifestation of C.C. Chulan's transformation. During battle fury, his body contorted. One eye receded into his skull while the other bulged outward. His hair stood rigid like wire. The hero light burned above his head. He wasn't raging in normal sense, was channeling forces that deformed his physical form to accommodate the energy flowing through him. The Ryastrad wasn't metaphorical, was described consistently across multiple accounts suggesting genuine transformed state, possibly what modern psychology would recognize as extreme dissociative episode enabling extraordinary physical performance. The Gasa binding him multiplied across his life. Don't eat horse meat. Don't sleep more than one night in the same place. Don't cross water horizontally, only vertically. Never refuse hospitality. These weren't random supernatural restrictions, but initiatory constraints designed to keep him in permanent state of heightened awareness. Breaking a gaze brought inevitable doom, but living under their constraints also prevented him from becoming settled, comfortable, or unconscious. The gazer ensured he remained forever on alert, forever straddling boundaries between ordinary and extraordinary consciousness. Archaeological evidence confirms warrior culture matching C.D. Chulan's story. Ritual combat between champions to avoid mass casualties. Head-taking practices. The cult of the severed head in Celtic warfare. The relationship between warriors and otherworldly beings. These weren't romantic inventions, were practices preserved in archaeological record. What makes C.C. Chulan's story significant is how it encodes these practices within narrative that also reveals deeper teachings about consciousness, sacrifice, and the price of transcendence. Queen Med of Connacht wanted a bull, the brown bull of Cooley specifically. It was magical, legendary, possessing power that extended beyond mere animal existence into cosmic principle. She invaded Ulster to take it, triggering a war that preserved Europe's oldest vernacular epic, the Tartine B. Boise, Ailge, the cattle raid of Cooley, a narrative that unfolds across weeks of narrative reading time, detailing a conflict that would reshape Irish mythology and influence European literature for centuries. The war began over a bull, but became a battle between cosmic forces using human warriors as pieces in their immortal game. The narrative preserves extraordinary detail, archaeological correlation, geographic precision, character psychology, but woven throughout is the otherworld dimension. When Medb's armies march, supernatural accompaniment appears. Shapeshifters travel with the troops. The war goddess Morrigan manifests in multiple forms. Events don't follow simple cause and effect but reflect complicated negotiations between mortal and divine realms. Every military decision has cosmic implication. Every human casualty ripples through layers of reality invisible to ordinary perception. Critically, the Tarban exists in the unique position of being Ireland's national epic, yet preserving obvious pagan content that Christianity struggled to suppress. written down by monks. Yes, but monks so committed to preserving pagan tradition that they maintained the original story despite its evident non-Christian character. The text suggests priority on preservation exceeded priority on conversion. The wisdom mattered more than the theology. Remarkable religious restraint in a period usually remembered for forcible conversion. The epic preserves sophisticated legal concepts, sovereignty, honor prices, the relationship between king and land, the reciprocal obligations of ruler and ruled, the concept that breaking one's word creates cosmically binding consequences. See Chulan's single combats at river fords occurred partly as practical military delaying tactic. One warrior against multiple enemies, he can control the choke point, but also as legal practice. Champions fighting rather than armies clashing meant fewer casualties. Codified rules of warfare. The civilization imposing structure even on its most violent practices. The supernatural elements aren't incidental but central. When the armies camp, otherworld interventions change battle conditions. When Chulan rests, the Morrigan appears. When alliances shift, it is through otherworld revelation. The Teat teaches that mortal conflict always reflects supernatural dimensions. The visible war is merely the material expression of unseen cosmological forces negotiating through human agency. Recognizing this transforms how you understand conflict. No war is merely political. All war operates on multiple planes simultaneously. He knew when he would die. The Druids had told him long ago. The knowledge never left him. Chulan lived every moment aware that a specific death awaited. When the final prophecy began to manifest, he didn't flee or hide or try to negotiate fate. He walked toward his doom singing. The Celtic hero didn't reject destiny, welcomed it. Chose glorious death with full knowledge over diminished life in safety. He knew exactly when and how he would die, and he walked toward that death singing, because a hero's doom was more precious than a coward's long life. The death tale structure follows consistent pattern in Celtic literature. The hero, weakened by violation of his Giza, or by magical opposition, faces enemies who previously couldn't touch him. Not through superior skill or strength, but through external circumstance that makes direct victory impossible. The hero accepts the inevitable, prepares for death, and dies spectacularly rather than accepting diminishment. Chulan's final moments exemplify this. Gravely wounded, he lashes himself to a standing stone to die on his feet. The raven goddess Morrigan, signifying his impending death, lands on his shoulder. His sword falls only when the hero light finally extinguishes. The description suggests no sudden failure, but gradual dimming of the force that animated him. When the light fades completely, the physical body can no longer maintain form. This heroic ethic influenced Celtic warfare profoundly. Archaeological evidence shows ritual combat prioritized, single champions fighting rather than armies clashing. The practice of taking heads as trophies reflects not savagery, but spiritual significance. The head was believed to contain the warrior's power. Preserving the head meant preserving the hero's essence. The practice also made warfare consciously terrible, visible, impossible to rationalize as bloodless political maneuvering. Christian assimilation of these heroes attempted, but ultimately failed to transform them completely. Chulan couldn't easily become Christian saint. His death wasn't martyrdom but heroic doom. His knowledge wasn't revealed truth but supernatural foresight. The story survived, though Christian authorities struggled with its explicitly pagan context. The monks preserved it anyway, suggesting recognition that something important existed in the narrative that transcended specific religious framework. The concept of meaningful death influenced Celtic spirituality profoundly. To achieve greatness required accepting mortality consciously. The fear many people carry about death, the denial, the avoidance, the Celtic hero actively refused. The doom was inevitable. Better to acknowledge it, make peace with it, and live fully in its shadow, than to spend life pretending it didn't exist. Behind every Celtic hero stood an invisible woman. In Irish texts, she manifests as Morrigan, Medb, or various sovereignty goddesses. Her form changes. Her power never diminishes. She represents the land itself, the sovereignty that grants kingship, the force that could raise up a warrior or destroy him depending on her favor. The hero's quest, his apparent independence, his individual greatness, All ultimately depended on this feminine power that transcended individual will. Behind every king stood an invisible queen, the land herself in female form, and when she withdrew her favor, kingdoms crumbled overnight. The sovereignty goddess appeared in multiple forms, sometimes young woman offering herself sexually to the worthy hero, granting both political power and magical gifts through union. Sometimes ancient crone testing the hero's respect and compassion. Sometimes the raven goddess Morrigan presiding over battlefields. Same power, different manifestation. The goddess required constant acknowledgement from those exercising power. Failed to honor her and the crops failed. The cattle sickened. The kingdom withered, not through punishment but through natural consequence of broken relationship. Archaeological evidence of female burials with royal regalia and weapons confirms that Celtic women wielded genuine temporal and spiritual authority. High-status graves with fighting implements and ceremonial objects suggest women warriors and rulers, not merely consorts or priestesses. The mythology preserved cultural memory of genuine female power that patriarchal succession gradually reduced, but never entirely eliminated. The sovereignty tradition preserved prehistoric concepts, the king as sacrifice ensuring fertility, the land as feminine divinity requiring proper relationship, political power as exchange involving sexual spiritual union. The king wasn't owner of land, was married to it, possessed authority only through proper relationship. If the king failed, the land withdrew its favor. A new king had to be found. The succession wasn't automatic but dependent on the goddess's acceptance. She literally embodied the kingdom's will. This tradition survived in Arthurian romance, where the land sickens under false kings and blooms under true sovereignty. The wounded king mythology reflects this same principle. When the king fails to maintain proper relationship with the land, physical deformity reflects spiritual damage. Healing requires not medicine but restoring right relationship. The king must be replaced or transformed. Only then does the land heal. The tradition's persistence into modern times shows through subtle cultural patterns. Irish political rhetoric often references the land with feminine pronouns, the sovereignty of Ireland, the idea that the nation itself is feminine entity. Pagan goddesses transformed into saints, but retained their connection to specific places. Saint Brigid replaces the goddess Brigid, but inhabits the same sacred wells. The transformation of form, the substance of feminine power anchoring spiritual authority, persists through centuries of Christian overlay. Ireland's history, as Celtic tradition recorded it, unfolds as a series of successive invasions and settlements. Each wave of invaders brought different forms of consciousness. Each established civilization. Each was eventually displaced by the next. The Leber Gablaran, the Book of Invasions, presents this not as mere political history, but as cosmic evolution of consciousness itself. The First Battle of Mag II marked the point where divine consciousness established itself in Irish territory, defeating the earlier inhabitants. Each wave of invaders brought a new kind of consciousness to Ireland, and the gods themselves were merely the second-to-last wave. The cycles represent ascending stages of human awareness. The Parthoin, first recorded inhabitants, represent the dawn of consciousness, simple awareness emerging from undifferentiation. The Nemedians represent struggle and growth through conflict. The Firbolg embody physical mastery, the development of technology and earthly civilization. The Tuatha De Danann represent magical consciousness, awareness that perceives hidden dimensions and commands reality. Directly, finally, the Milesians represent modern humanity, rational, complex, and anchored in material reality, but forever haunted by dimmer awareness of what was lost. Medieval monks preserving these stories created elaborate genealogies connecting Irish kings to biblical patriarchs. The narrative frameworks appear Christian, but the content remains stubbornly pagan. The monks maintained these stories not from theological necessity, but from conviction that something essential existed in them. Consciousness could evolve through stages. The gods represented higher forms of awareness that humanity had accessed, and that might be accessed again. The first battle pitted the Tuatha De Danann against the Firbolg. the gods against the giants of the physical world. The victory of the Tuatha De Tuatha Danann established magical consciousness's primacy over purely material consciousness. But victory wasn't annihilation. The Fir-Bolg survived in Otherworld. The Tuatha De Danann established rulership of the visible world, but recognized their predecessors' continued existence on other planes. The historical pattern, colonizer conquering colonized, was transformed into mythological pattern. Different consciousness forms coexisting on different planes. Archaeological evidence offers tantalizing connections. Neolithic stone monuments preceding Bronze Age settlements by centuries. Different populations occupying Ireland at different periods. Copper Age peoples whose artifacts suggest sophisticated technology. Bronze Age invaders establishing new cultural patterns. Could these invasions represent genuine population movements that later generations mythologized? Could the gods represent memory of earlier peoples, whom later populations perceived as superhuman due to superior technology or different consciousness patterns? The mythology preserved genuine historical transitions as sacred narrative, what historians eventually studied through pottery shards and radioactive decay. Celtic tradition experienced as divine action. The continuity of this interpretive framework, viewing historical change through mythological lens, means the Celtic mind never separated history from spirituality. Events had multiple simultaneous truth levels. The invasion was literal and historical. It was also cosmic principle. The gods conquered because that is how consciousness evolution occurs. Opposition yields to higher awareness. The Second Battle of Magtu presented a different conflict entirely. The Tuatha De Danann faced the Fomorians, primordial beings representing chaos, darkness, and entropy. This wasn't straightforward conquest, but cosmic war. The universe itself determined upon this battle. Order fighting chaos, consciousness fighting unconsciousness, creation fighting dissolution. When gods and chaos monsters clash, their battle isn't just war. It is the universe deciding whether to continue existing or return to primordial void. The Fomorians were monstrous, one-legged, one-armed, possessed of giant cyclopean eyes, and physical deformity, suggesting wrongness at fundamental level. Yet paradoxically, they possessed wisdom. Balor of the evil eye, his gaze destroyed whatever it perceived, was horrifying, but also granted him certain knowledge. The Fomorians weren't simply evil, represented the principle that had to be contained, but never fully eliminated. Chaos didn't destroy the cosmos outright, persisted in the edges, remained accessible in dreams and madness. The balance between order and chaos maintained reality's existence. Lu, the multi-skilled god, defeated Balor, his grandfather, with a sling stone through the eye, the young consciousness overcoming the old, the eye that sees everything permanently closed. Lu represented the qualities of consciousness that transcended single faculty. He could fight, craft, heal, and prophesy simultaneously. Multi-skilled meant multi-conscious, capable of perceiving reality from multiple simultaneous perspectives. The victory of such consciousness over monolithic chaos, force, represented evolution of awareness. The battle narrative encodes sophisticated understanding of psychological development. Chaos isn't defeated through rejection, but through integration. Balor can't be destroyed, only blinded. His eyesight, his particular form of destructive perception, is neutralized. The chaos remains. The cosmic force endures. But it is contained, made manageable. Transformed from rampant destroyer into controlled principle. Archaeological evidence of Bronze Age weapons and battle sites provides material corroboration of epic's warrior content. The specific weapons described sling stones of particular weight, spear casting techniques, match evidence from archaeological weaponry. The battle formations described correspond to what Bronze Age warfare likely resembled, but woven through realistic detail is supernatural element. The gods didn't just fight like humans transformed, multiplied, manifested in animal shapes. The mythology transformed historical battle into cosmic drama. The The second battle established pattern repeated across cultures worldwide. The war between order and chaos at cosmos's foundation. The universe doesn't achieve stasis, persists through constant negotiation. Creation occurs through this eternal struggle. Without chaos, nothing new emerges. Without order, nothing persists. The tension between them generates reality. Celtic mythology encoded this principle explicitly in the battle narrative. The theology matched observable cosmos, change, entropy, death, absolutely real, but also meaning, order, and creation, all simultaneously true. All the wisdom of the world swam in a single fish. The salmon of knowledge, born in sacred well from which hazelnuts continuously fell. The nuts possessed all knowledge. The salmon ate the nuts. Contained within its flesh, the accumulated wisdom of creation. Whoever tasted the salmon would know everything, past, present, future, all simultaneously accessible, all understanding available to the consumer. All the wisdom of the world swam in a single fish, and whoever tasted its flesh would know everything that ever was or would be. The myth of Fintan the Wise preserves this teaching. Fintan survived every era of Irish history through continuous transformation, shape-shifting into different forms, never truly dying, always present at crucial historical moments, eventually becoming the salmon of knowledge itself. Living in waters where wisdom flowed, the narrative suggests that through transformation and survival across time, consciousness accumulates understanding. The sage who survives centuries develops omniscience, not through revelation, but through accumulated experience across lifetimes. Young Fionn Mac Cumhale accidentally achieves enlightenment when burning his thumb while cooking the salmon for his master. Sucking the wound to ease pain, he gains all the salmon's knowledge. The enlightenment arrives unexpectedly. The hero isn't prepared, doesn't even understand what has happened initially. The teaching encodes that genuine knowledge can't be forced or achieved through deliberate seeking. Arrives through apparent accident, changes everything when it does. The mythology encodes initiatory pattern. The sealed knowledge exists. The proper student approaches but doesn't comprehend the teaching initially. The revelation comes through slight wound, small pain, the traumatic moment that opens consciousness to receive what it couldn't previously access. The teaching is transferred not through words but through mysterious transference. Touching the sacred creates permanent change. Salmon appears throughout Celtic archaeology, depicted on coins, metalwork, and carvings. The fish wasn't ordinary animal but cosmic principle. The creature swimming between fresh water and ocean represented transition between material and spiritual realms. Salmon return to spawning grounds annually, navigate impossible distances, achieve their destination despite overwhelming obstacles. The journey itself teaches, the persistence teaches. The transformation from living creature to spawned corpse nourishing, next generation encodes cycles of death and rebirth. Wisdom, animal traditions appear worldwide. Serpents granting knowledge through consumption, birds revealing futures. The pattern suggests universal shamanic teaching. Consciousness can transfer through consuming or encountering certain creatures. The relationship transcends mere nutrition, becomes communion. The creature becomes vehicle for knowledge transmission from otherworld or deep time into present consciousness. The salmon of knowledge encodes this principle specifically. Fish living in hidden waters. Consciousness accessible only through proper relationship. The transformation came gradually, not sudden collapse but shift. The Tuatha Dé Danann, divine rulers, gradually ceded sovereignty to mortal humans. The Miliesians arrived, the mythical ancestors of historical Irish peoples. Conflict occurred. Negotiation followed. Cosmic treaty established. The visible world belonged to humans. The underground realms, the other world, belonged to the gods. Surface and depth coexisting but separated. The gods never left Ireland. They just became invisible, ruling from hollow hills and influencing events from behind the veil of the visible world. The transformation of gods into fairies represents crucial adaptation. Gods didn't die, persisted in transformed state. The underground Sidar mounds became their kingdoms. The visible landscape became their dwelling place. inaccessible to ordinary human perception. The gods remained present, remained active, but existence shifted to different planes, remained accessible only through thin places or special consciousness states. Christianity would later understand these beings as demons or fairies, but the continuity of belief across religious change suggests something genuine beyond theological framework. The geographical association intensified. Every significant landscape feature became attributed to specific deity. The paps of Anutu Mountains embodied the mother goddess. The river Boyne flowed from Bone, the goddess. Knocknaria Mountain housed the warrior Queen Med in her Sidai. Hundreds of place. Name associations created sacred geography, where gods literally inhabited the land. Travelling through Ireland meant travelling through mythology. Landscape itself was theology written in stone and stream. Archaeological evidence shows unbroken continuity of veneration at specific sites from Neolithic through Christian periods. Sacred wells that were goddess shrines became Christian holy wells without name change. The sites didn't lose sanctity. The theology shifted while the sacred place remained constant. The land remembered. The place itself maintained power independently of whatever religious structure explained it. Walk into certain ancient sites, and consciousness shifts. Something present that transcends explanatory framework. Christianization transformed gods into saints without fully eradicating divine association. Saint Bridget paralleled goddess, Bridget so precisely that many scholars consider them identical entity in different costume. Saint Michael on mountaintops corresponded to pre-Christian sacred high places. The churches built on sacred sites inherited rather than conquered the sanctity. Power persisted, theology changed, but something essential, the sense of presence, the power of place, survived. The twilight of gods represented maturation. Humanity didn't destroy divinity, grew into relationship with it, learned to exist alongside it. The visible world became human kingdom. The hidden world remained divine, both simultaneously real, both requiring respect. The Celtic understanding never needed gods withdrawn from cosmic functioning, just needed them out of direct human affairs. Let humans govern themselves. Divine forces govern hidden dimensions. The arrangement proved surprisingly stable, lasted well into modern times in Celtic consciousness.
The fair-haired warrior who lived in forests and mountains. Fionn mac Cumhaill represented different heroic model than Cuchulainn. Where Cuchulainn embodied individual glory and beautiful death, Fionn embodied wisdom, longevity, and the burden of knowledge that accompanies survival. His stories bridge mythology and pseudo-history, preserving authentic memories of Iron Age warrior bands living partially outside mainstream Celtic society, yet wielding genuine influence. He could suck his thumb and know anything happening in Ireland, past or future Euro, but wisdom's price was watching everyone he loved die while he lived on. Fionn's upbringing established his liminal status. After his father's murder, his mother raised him in wilderness, training him in both warfare and poetry simultaneously. The combination was rare. Warriors and poets were separate professions. That Fionn embodied both indicated his unusual nature. He would bridge worlds, connect domains normally separated. His knowledge came not from single source, but from multiple overlapping traditions maintained in conscious tension. The accident of enlightenment, burning his thumb while cooking the salmon of knowledge, and gaining omniscience through sucking the burn grants Fionn supernatural insight. He knows futures, can navigate consequences of choices before making them. But omniscience brings isolation. See the futures, and you see the dead. See the paths, and you see the losses. Knowledge becomes burden. Fionn lives centuries longer than companions, watches generation after generation die, achieves wisdom while losing innocence. Archaeological evidence reveals young male warrior groups separated from settled communities. The groups maintained distinct identity, lived seasonally, practiced martial arts continuously, possibly served as mercenaries or defensive forces. Could this correspond to historical reality behind the Fianna myths? Bronze Age and Iron Age warfare evidence suggests informal warrior bands existed alongside formal armies. The Fianna legends might preserve memory of such groups, mythologized through generations of oral tradition. Hundreds of Irish place names associate with Fionn, sites where he supposedly rested, mountains where his deeds occurred. Fionn's mythology created geographical overlay on physical landscape. Travelling through Ireland meant travelling through Fionn's story. The landscape itself became mnemonic device. Each feature triggered associated narrative. The oral tradition transformed geography into memory palace, where all stories could be accessed by knowing the proper locations. Fionn's exceptional longevity sets him apart from other heroes who achieve glory through brief, intense lives. He lives for centuries, watches empires rise, see kingdoms fall, eventually journeys to the Otherworld. The extended lifespan isn't reward but consequence. Living so long, he accumulates wisdom but also losses. The price of knowledge is watching time consume everyone you love. The stories never hide this cost. Fionn's wisdom comes precisely because he survived. Survival itself became the teaching. Number. Section 6.2. The Warrior Code of the Fianna. 500 words. To join the Fianna meant leaving clan, family, and all conventional social bonds, meant accepting entrance tests designed to eliminate those unprepared for the commitment, meant choosing absolute freedom and likely early death. The requirements were extraordinary: running through forests without breaking twigs underfoot, leaping over head-height branches, composing perfect poetry while engaged in combat, defending yourself against 9 warriors while buried waist-deep. The tests weren't merely physical, but demanded integration of multiple consciousness states. To join the Fianna meant abandoning family, clan, and comfort for a life of perfect freedom and probable death before 30. The Fianna maintained strict code unknown to broader Celtic society. They operated in parallel structure to normal political hierarchy, accepted members regardless of clan affiliation or birth status. A slave and a king could exist as equals within Fianna ranks if both met the requirements. Revolutionary and tribal society where birth determined nearly everything, the Fianna created meritocracy of warriors. Status depended on skill and courage, not genealogy. The warriors lived semi-nomadically, 6 months each summer in wilderness areas, living off the land. They hunted, they trained, they maintained physical conditioning at extreme levels. Winters, they billeted with communities in exchange for protection and service, creating parallel society with own laws, own recruitment, own governance. The threat represented by such an organization would have been apparent to Celtic kings. The Fianna's independence, their different loyalty structures, their capacity to mobilize quickly, all made them simultaneously valuable and dangerous. Archaeological evidence suggests historical reality behind the Fianna. Young male burials with distinctive grave goods indicating warrior status. Settlements patterns suggesting transient warrior groups. Evidence of organized hunting and resource management. The Fianna legends might preserve memory of actual warrior bands that society tolerated despite their potentially disruptive nature. The bands apparently integrated seasonally with settled communities while maintaining separate identity. The Fianna's ecological role wasn't merely military. They protected forests, regulated hunting, maintained balance between wilderness and civilization. The legends suggest they served as environmental stewards as well as warriors. In a society dependent on forest resources, warrior bands maintaining wilderness integrity would be valuable. The Fianna's combination of military prowess and environmental knowledge made them essential to Celtic society's survival. Number. Section 6.3. The Pursuit of Diarmuid and Grain, 500 words. Love destroyed the Fianna. Graine, betrothed to aging Fionn, saw young Diarmuid and placed a guise on him, ritual prohibition that his honour wouldn't allow him to refuse. He had to elope with her. Breaking the betrothal between king and bride-to-be was catastrophic breach, but the Gace superseded even loyalty to Fionn. Diarmuid escaped with Graina. The Fianna pursued. For a year across Ireland, the lovers fled while being hunted by their own brotherhood. She loved him the moment she saw him. He was honour-bound to resist, and their flight across Ireland left a trail of stones that still mark where love defeated loyalty. The narrative explores generational conflict, the old king losing to younger rival, sexual desire violating social obligation, personal love overriding warrior brotherhood. Every value collision played out. The couple sleeps in different place each night, never under roof or roof tree, existing outside normal civilization. They create parallel geography. Standing stones still marked their beds. The landscape itself recorded their flight. Trees where they rested gained names. Springs where they drank became sacred. The lovers' tragedy imprinted itself physically on the land. The Geist compulsion explores the cosmic rule system. Honor-bound men, even to honor-bound men, to respect others' rituals. Placing a Geist couldn't be refused. The supernatural obligations superseded personal will. This made society function despite chaos and violence. The Geist system created binding structure that prevented total freedom and consequent disorder. But when the Geist forced impossible choice, the tragedy revealed itself. The story teaches costly lessons. Personal desire doesn't justify destroying social bonds, but genuine connection can break through even the strongest obligation. The ending satisfies neither justice nor romance. Diarmuid dies of enchanted boar's wound. Fionn, who could heal him through his powers, refuses. The refusal isn't just punishment, but representation of ruptured bond. Once loyalty fractures, relationship cannot fully heal. The price for following personal desire is exile from the brotherhood. The price for social obligation would be denying genuine connection. Either way, loss. The Fianna's last great conflict came when supernatural invasion threatened Ireland itself. The King of the World led vast fleet against the island. Forces from every known land assembled. The battle would determine if Ireland would remain independent or fall to outside control. All previous Fianna conflicts, their internal feuds, their generational struggles became trivial beside this external threat. The warriors reunited, divided factions reconciled, the Brotherhood's purpose clarified. The Fianna's time ended not with defeat but with victory so complete that heroes were no longer neared a euro, only their memories, haunting every hill and valley. The battle at Ventry preserved in literature descriptions of extraordinary scale. Warriors from Africa, warriors from Asia, warriors from unknown distant lands. The narrative's universal scope suggests not historical account, but mythological representation of ultimate conflict. The battle between Irish forces and universal opposition, order against chaos, the known against the unknown. The victory meant Ireland survived, but at cost that couldn't be sustained. The conflict consumed the Fianna's strength. Too many died. The survivors, aged and diminished, found themselves no longer needed in peacetime. The warrior society that survived warfare couldn't survive victory. The purpose that held them together, defence of Ireland, evaporated. Without external threat, the hierarchy that maintained unity fractured. Without common enemy, individual ambitions resurged. Oisin survived into the Christian era, living beyond the heroic age he embodied. Journeying to Tir na Nog, the land of youth, where he experienced 300 years in what seemed like 3 days, then returning to find everything changed. Christianity transformed Ireland. The pagan traditions became folklore. The warrior code became quaint relic. Oisin, ageless in the Otherworld, returned to a country that had evolved without him. He became impossible figure, alive but anachronistic. His stories became tales told to Christian monks who preserved them despite their pagan content. The Fianna's dissolution wasn't destruction, but transformation. Warriors scattered, became local guardians, settled into communities, faded into landscape and legend, but their memory persisted. Place names throughout Ireland associated with specific Fianna members, standing stones marking their deeds. The landscape itself became a mnemonic device keeping their stories alive. They didn't die. Transformed, became spirits inhabiting the wild places they'd protected, continued their work from hidden realm. The Fenian cycle, the body of legends surrounding the Fianna, continued developing long after the historical period they depicted. Medieval storytellers rewrote the tales, added new adventures, elaborated old ones. The tradition remained living rather than fixed. Each generation could add to the Fianna's legend. The ancient warriors became eternally contemporary, always available for new interpretation. The Fianna represented not historical group, but archetypal pattern, youth, freedom, wilderness, loyalty, and tragedy that every age could reinterpret through its own concerns. The fair-haired warrior who lived in forests and mountains. Fionn mac Cumhaill represented different heroic model than Cuchulainn. Where Cuchulainn embodied individual glory and beautiful death, Fionn embodied wisdom, longevity, and the burden of knowledge that accompanies survival. His stories bridge mythology and pseudo-history, preserving authentic memories of Iron Age warrior bands, living partially outside mainstream Celtic society, yet wielding genuine influence. He could suck his thumb and know anything happening in Ireland, past or future a euro, but wisdom's price was watching everyone he loved die while he lived on. Fionn's upbringing established his liminal status. After his father's murder, his mother raised him in wilderness, training him in both warfare and poetry simultaneously. The combination was rare. Warriors and poets were separate professions. That Fionn embodied both indicated his unusual nature. He would bridge worlds, connect domains normally separated. His knowledge came not from single source, but from multiple overlapping traditions maintained in conscious tension. The accident of enlightenment burning his thumb while cooking the salmon of knowledge and gaining omniscience through sucking the burn grants Fionn supernatural insight. He knows futures, can navigate consequences of choices before making them. But omniscience brings isolation. See the futures and you see the dead. See the paths and you see the losses. Knowledge becomes burden. Fionn lives centuries longer than companions. Watches generation after generation die. Achieves wisdom while losing innocence. Archaeological evidence reveals young male warrior groups separated from settled communities. The groups maintained distinct identity, lived seasonally, practiced martial arts continuously, possibly served as mercenaries or defensive forces. Could this correspond to historical reality behind the Fianna myths? Bronze Age and Iron Age warfare evidence suggests informal warrior bands existed alongside formal armies. The Fianna legends might preserve memory of such groups, mythologized through generations of oral tradition. Hundreds of Irish place names associate with Fionn, sites where he supposedly rested, mountains where his deeds occurred. Fionn's mythology created geographical overlay on physical landscape. Travelling through Ireland meant travelling through Fionn's story. The landscape itself became a mnemonic device. Each feature triggered associated narrative. The oral tradition transformed geography into memory palace, where all stories could be accessed by knowing the proper locations. Fionn's exceptional longevity sets him apart from other heroes who achieve glory through brief, intense lives. He lives for centuries, watches empires rise, see kingdoms fall, eventually journeys to the Otherworld. The extended lifespan isn't reward, but consequence. Living so long, he accumulates wisdom but also losses. The price of knowledge is watching time consume everyone you love. The stories never hide this cost. Fionn's wisdom comes precisely because he survived. Survival itself became the teaching. To join the Fianna meant leaving clan, family, and all conventional social bonds. Meant accepting entrance tests designed to eliminate those unprepared for the commitment. Meant choosing absolute freedom and likely early death. The requirements were extraordinary, running through forests without breaking twigs underfoot, leaping over head-height branches, composing perfect poetry while engaged in combat, defending yourself against 9 warriors while buried waist-deep. The tests weren't merely physical, but demanded integration of multiple consciousness states. To join the Fianna meant abandoning family, clan, and comfort for a life of perfect freedom euro and probable death before 30. The Fianna maintained strict code unknown to broader Celtic society. They operated in parallel structure to normal political hierarchy, accepted members regardless of clan affiliation or birth status. A slave and a king could exist as equals within Fianna ranks if both met the requirements. Revolutionary in tribal society where birth determined nearly everything, the Fianna created meritocracy of warriors. Status depended on skill and courage, not genealogy. The warriors lived semi-nomadically, 6 months each summer in wilderness areas, living off the land. They hunted, they trained, they maintained physical conditioning at extreme levels. Winters they billeted with communities in exchange for protection and service, creating parallel society with own laws, own recruitment, own governance. The threat represented by such an organization would have been apparent to Celtic kings. The Fianna's independence, their different loyalty structures, their capacity to mobilize quickly, all made them simultaneously valuable and dangerous. Archaeological evidence suggests historical reality behind the Fianna. Young male burials with distinctive grave goods indicating warrior status. Settlements patterns suggesting transient warrior groups. Evidence of organized hunting and resource management. The Fianna legends might preserve memory of actual warrior bands that society tolerated despite their potentially disruptive nature. The bands apparently integrated seasonally with settled communities while maintaining separate identity. The Fianna's ecological role wasn't merely military. They protected forests, regulated hunting, maintained balance between wilderness and civilization. The legends suggest they served as environmental stewards as well as warriors. In a society dependent on forest resources, warrior bands maintaining wilderness integrity would be valuable. The Fianna's combination of military prowess and environmental knowledge made them essential to Celtic society's survival. Love destroyed the Fianna. Grain, betrothed to aging Fionn, saw young Diarmid and placed a guise on him. Ritual prohibition that his honor wouldn't allow him to refuse. He had to elope with her. Breaking the betrothal between king and bride-to-be was catastrophic breach, but the gaise superseded even loyalty to Fionn. Diarmid escaped with Graine. The Fianna pursued. For a year across Ireland, the lovers fled while being hunted by their own brotherhood. She loved him the moment she saw him. He was honor-bound to resist, and their flight across Ireland left a trail of stones that still mark where love defeated loyalty. The narrative explores generational conflict, the old king losing to younger rival, sexual desire violating social obligation, personal love overriding warrior brotherhood. Every value collision played out. The couple sleeps in different place each night, never under roof or roof tree, existing outside normal civilization. They create parallel geography. Standing stones still marked their beds. The landscape itself recorded their flight. Trees where they rested gained names. Springs where they drank became sacred. The lovers' tragedy imprinted itself physically on the land. The Gai's compulsion explores the cosmic rule system. Honor-bound men, even to honor-bound men to respect others' rituals. Placing a Gais couldn't be refused. The supernatural obligation superseded personal will. This made society function despite chaos and violence. The Gais system created binding structure that prevented total freedom and consequent disorder. But when the Gais forced impossible choice, the tragedy revealed itself. The story teaches costly lessons. Personal desire doesn't justify destroying social bonds, but genuine connection can break through even the strongest obligation. The ending satisfies neither justice nor romance. Diarmid dies of enchanted boar's wound. Fionn, who could heal him through his powers, refuses. The refusal isn't just punishment, but representation of ruptured bond. Once loyalty fractures, relationship cannot fully heal. The price for following personal desire is exile from the brotherhood. The price for social obligation would be denying genuine connection. Either way, loss. The Fianna's last great conflict came when supernatural invasion threatened Ireland itself. The king of the world led vast fleet against the island, forces from every known land assembled. The battle would determine if Ireland would remain independent or fall to outside control. All previous Fianna conflicts their internal feuds. Their generational struggles became trivial beside this external threat. The warriors reunited, divided factions reconciled, the Brotherhood's purpose clarified. The Fianna's time ended not with defeat, but with victory so complete that heroes were no longer needed only their memories, haunting every hill and valley. The battle at Ventry preserved in literature descriptions of extraordinary scale. Warriors from Africa, warriors from Asia, warriors from unknown distant lands. The narrative's universal scope suggests not historical account, but mythological representation of ultimate conflict. The battle between Irish forces and universal opposition. Order against chaos. The known against the unknown. The victory meant Ireland survived, but at cost that couldn't be sustained. The conflict consumed the Fianna's strength. Too many died. The survivors, aged and diminished, found themselves no longer needed in peacetime. The warrior society that survived warfare couldn't survive victory. The purpose that held them together, defense of Ireland, evaporated. Without external threat, the hierarchy that maintained unity fractured. Without common enemy, individual ambitions resurged. Oisin survived into the Christian era, living beyond the heroic age he embodied. Journeying to Tir na Nog, the land of youth, where he experienced 300 years in what seemed like 3 days, then returning to find everything changed. Christianity transformed Ireland. The pagan traditions became folklore. The warrior code became quaint relic. Oisin, ageless in the Otherworld, returned to a country that had evolved without him. He became impossible, figure alive, but anachronistic. His stories became tales told to Christian monks who preserved them despite their pagan content. The Fianna's dissolution wasn't destruction but transformation. Warriors scattered, became local guardians, settled into communities, faded into landscape and legend, but their memory persisted. Place names throughout Ireland associated with specific Fianna members, standing stones marking their deeds. The landscape itself became mnemonic device keeping their stories alive. They didn't die, transformed, became spirits inhabiting the wild places they'd protected, continued their work from hidden realm. The Fenian cycle, the body of legends surrounding the Fianna, continued developing long after the historical period they depicted. Medieval storytellers rewrote the tales, added new adventures, elaborated old ones. The tradition remained living rather than fixed. Each generation could add to the Fianna's legend. The ancient warriors became eternally contemporary, always available for new interpretation. The Fianna represented not historical group but archetypal pattern youth, freedom, wilderness, loyalty, and tragedy that every age could reinterpret through its own concerns. The Celtic understanding of kingship transcended mere political authority. The king didn't rule the land. The king married the land, the goddess embodying the territory accepted or rejected potential rulers. Acceptance manifested through signs and wonders. The right king could cause the land to flourish. Crops grew abundant. Cattle thrived. Weather obeyed royal command. Wrong king brought environmental disaster. Crops failed. Cattle died. Rain abandoned the land. The kingship wasn't title but cosmic function. The king maintained relationship between human society and natural forces. When the right king sat on the throne, the land itself responded crops grew abundant, wars ceased, and even the weather obeyed royal command. The royal inauguration, at Tara Island's sacred centre involved elaborate ritual. The Stone of Destiny, incorporated into the inauguration chair, would cry out when the legitimate king sat upon it. The sound was audible, verified by witnesses. The mechanism was unclear, but the belief that the stone itself recognized true kingship was absolute. The land itself participated in the selection process. The ceremony wasn't merely political symbol, was believed to activate genuine cosmic alignment. Archaeological evidence confirms Tara's extraordinary significance. The massive earthworks, the precise astronomical alignments, the layout suggesting not mere fortification, but sacred center integrating spiritual and political authority. Similar sites throughout Ireland, Emain Machar, Cruachan, Cashel displayed identical patterns. Royal centres were also sacred centres. The concentration of power meant concentration of spiritual authority. The king's 3 marriages reflected 3 levels of relationship. Marriage to the land goddess ensured fertility and prosperity. Marriage to truth, the Fir Flathamon, the prince's truth, meant that the king's word shaped reality. A true king's promise manifested inevitably. His justice produced peace. His judgment resolved disputes. His presence at ceremonies ensured cosmic alignment. Third marriage was to his people through reciprocal obligation. The king protected them, provided justice, maintained cosmic order. The people gave loyalty, service, and resources. The relationship was contractual, not tyrannical. The blemish myth reveals the severity of the requirement. A king with physical deformity, blindness, lameness, loss of limb, lost legitimacy. Muircatach mac Muiradaig, one of Ireland's greatest kings, was deposed when an accident cost him an eye. The blemish implied spiritual damage. The goddess withdrew her favour. Environmental consequences followed inevitably. Crops failed, cattle sickened. The king had to abdicate or die to restore fertility. The system created extraordinary pressure on the king to maintain himself in perfect condition. The slightest injury threatened the entire social structure. Every king accepted kingship, knowing the price. The mysterious threefold death, appearing throughout Celtic sources, simultaneously dying by wounding, drowning, and burning, hanging. The description appears too consistent across sources to be mere literary convention. Bog bodies discovered in northern Europe show evidence of exactly this pattern. Strangled, throat cut, and drowned, with burnt bread in stomachs suggesting ritual last meals. Every king knew that accepting the crown meant accepting the noose, the blade, and the water a euro, sovereignty's gift, came with death as its price. The ritual regicide represented cosmic principle. Kings embodied the land's fertility. As they aged and weakened, so did the land. The periodic replacement of kings wasn't merely political, but agricultural necessity. The old king had to be removed to allow the land's regeneration. The process wasn't cruelty, but cosmic housekeeping. The death of one ensured the fertility of all. The threefold death wasn't punishment, was sacrifice. The king consciously accepted that his reign would end in specific fashion. The fate was known. Prophecies predicted it. The king couldn't escape. Attempting to avoid prophesied death only ensured it occurred inevitably. The teachings were explicit. You cannot refuse your destiny. You cannot hide from what fate demands. The only choice was how to meet it cowardly or with dignity. Most Celtic kings chose the latter. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites shows sophisticated understanding of the kingship sacrifice. Prestigious grave goods, careful body positioning, deposits suggesting ritual context. The bog bodies showing ritual death, these weren't mere executions but ceremonies. The king descended into wet ground, underwent triple ordeal, released the cosmic forces back into the land. The kingdom cycled. Prosperity regenerated through sacrifice. Christianity transformed but couldn't eliminate these traditions. Martyred kings became saints. Ritual deaths became miracles. The sacrifice persisted. The sacred kingship concept survived in modified form. Medieval kings still maintained symbolic relationship with land, still required physical perfection, still faced threat of deposition for blemish or weakness. Cormac mac Airt represented the Celtic ideal of perfect sovereignty, known as the Great High King whose reign brought Ireland's golden age. The legendary accounts describe no winters during his rule, impossible harvests, universal peace. The extraordinary achievements traced to his perfect relationship with the goddess. His alignment with cosmic principle was so complete that natural order itself responded. Cormac ruled so perfectly that Ireland remembered no winters during his reign na Euro, and when he died, the land itself mourned with 7 years of scarce harvests. The recognition of Cormac's right to kingship occurred when, as unknown youth, he correctly decided a case the current king decided wrongly. The truth of his judgment manifested physically. The wrongful king's palace collapsed. The legitimacy was undeniable. The gods themselves confirmed Cormac's worth. He was installed immediately despite lacking royal blood or conventional claim. The texts attributed to Cormac preserve sophisticated political philosophy. The instructions of Cormac and the Tegas Rio teach through royal advice how to judge rightly, how to maintain the balance between king and people, how to ensure the land thrives. The wisdom seems practical advice about governance, economics, and justice. But woven through is the supernatural dimension. The king must mediate between material and spiritual realms. His decisions ripple through both planes simultaneously. Cormac's mysterious relationship with Manannan mac Lir, the sea god, grants him otherworldly treasures. The cup that breaks when lies are spoken and mends for truth. The vessel granting only truthful speech. Later traditions would develop this into the Holy Grail. Cormac's story preserves what Arthurian romance elaborates, the sacred object ensuring right relationship between king and cosmos, the king possessing truth-granting power because his consciousness aligns with cosmic truth. His death choking on a salmon bone connects him directly to wisdom traditions, the salmon of knowledge, the fishing for wisdom. The death by salmon bone is unique, not the threefold death, suggests different sacrifice, his wisdom becoming literally stuck in his throat, preventing speech, manifesting as physical choking. The teaching is layered. Knowledge sometimes kills. Truth sometimes stops the breath. The Togail Bruidna da Derga, the destruction of Da Derga's hostel, depicts the catastrophe that befalls King Conair when sovereignty shatters. The narrative serves as cautionary tale. What happens when the right relationship between king and land breaks? When the king violates his Jisa? When cosmic alignment becomes disruption? In one night, the perfect king became the broken king, and his death didn't just end a life a Euro, it shattered the cosmic order Ireland depended upon. Conair receives his Giasa, specific prohibitions that maintain his kingship. Travel rightwise around Ireland, always keep the sun on his right. Never hunt birds, they were his transformed kinswomen. Never refuse hospitality, the king must open doors to all. Simple rules, but Conair breaks each one progressively. Each violation weakens reality's fabric. The bonds holding chaos outside the kingdom stretch thin. The hostel itself, described with 7 doors and supernatural inhabitants, represents cosmic center, where all worlds intersect. Construction of it was already remarkable. 7 doors suggested multiple planes accessible from single location. The architecture encoded multi-dimensional geometry. The hostel wasn't merely physical structure but gateway between realms. As Conair's Geasa violations accumulate, reality breaks down, rivers reverse flow, fires refuse to light, monstrous beings appear. The normal rules of existence suspend. The hostel becomes battlefield, not military conflict but cosmic dissolution. Divine forces assert themselves. The land reasserts its authority over the king. Conair and his champions perform impossible feats, dying repeatedly, yet continuing to fight. Druids lose their power to influence events. Language itself becomes ineffective. The entire fabric of ordered reality tears. The tale demonstrates that sovereignty depends on continuous right relationship. Kingship isn't permanent, isn't achieved once, requires daily renewal through maintaining proper alignment. One night of violations cascades into total catastrophe. The proportional reaction suggests cosmic principle. The universe doesn't merely punish transgression, returns to chaos through proportional dissolution. The king's personal failure becomes civilization's failure, becomes reality's failure. The Druids who survived Roman destruction in continental Europe and maintained practice in Ireland until Christianity's arrival represented continuity of tradition reaching back to prehistoric shamanism. They weren't merely priests in conventional sense, were judges whose verdicts superseded kings, were teachers preserving thousands of years of oral knowledge, were technologists of consciousness manipulating non-ordinary states through disciplined technique. The Druids' function wasn't singular but multiple, reflecting understanding that genuine wisdom keeper required mastery of multiple domains. When a Druid spoke in ritual voice, kings stepped down from thrones, armies fled without fighting, and the very elements rearranged themselves to match the spoken word. The Druid's threefold function, judge, priest, teacher, created power that transcended any single authority. The king's rule remained legitimate only if the Druid acknowledged it. The judge's verdict could be appealed, but only to the Druid. The teacher's authority superseded all institutional structures. The combination meant Druids wielded authority comparable to Rome itself, yet depended not on legions but on cultural consent. Their power was consent-based, could be revoked, but while it existed, was absolute. Specific Druidic practices, preserved in Irish sources, reveal their technical sophistication. The Tab Hi's bull feast ceremony involved ritual consumption of sacred beef. A Druid would eat the cooked meat and fall into deep sleep. During sleep, the dreams revealed the true king. The vision wasn't subjective fantasy, was understood as genuine contact with otherworld knowledge. The Druid's consciousness traveled during sleep, accessed information from divine realms, returned with knowledge determining succession. The Imbas Forosnai, illumination between the hands, represented another technique. A Druid would place hands over face in specific position and fall into trance. During the trance, knowledge would arrive unbidden. Prophecy, divine instruction, answers to specific questions. The consciousness shifted to channel knowledge from beyond ordinary mind. The technique was repeatable. Trained Druids could apparently activate it deliberately. The Dishatal du Shenaib extemporaneous incantation allowed the Druid to speak verse spontaneously. The consciousness would shift into poetic state. Words would emerge without conscious composition. The verse apparently contained genuine knowledge, prophecy mixed with poetry. The Druid became channel for expression of truths that conscious mind couldn't ordinarily access. Archaeological evidence supporting textual claims exists throughout Celtic territories. Ritual deposits at inauguration sites suggest ceremonial practices matching the descriptions. Evidence of cattle sacrifice at sacred locations. Votive offerings indicating continuous practice across centuries. The geographically dispersed evidence suggests not isolated phenomena, but systematic practices integrated into Celtic culture across vast territories. The Druids claim to control weather, create illusions, and travel instantly between locations shouldn't be dismissed as mere fantasy. Modern consciousness research recognizes that trained minds can apparently achieve non-ordinary capabilities. The Druids' lengthy training, traditionally 20 years, could produce neurological changes enabling genuine perceptual modifications. What seemed supernatural was sophisticated consciousness technology. When Christianity arrived in Ireland, the transformation of Druids into Christian monks represented remarkable accommodation. Saint Columba, educated as both Druid and priest, demonstrated supernatural powers indistinguishable from Druidism. Controlling weather, prophesying, banishing demons. The continuity was so complete that distinguishing Christian and pagan practices becomes impossible. The forms transformed, the substance persisted. The Druids didn't disappear when Christianity arrived Euro. They put on monks' robes and continued their work, hiding ancient wisdom in hymns and prayers. The Irish monasteries became centres for preserving pre-Christian knowledge. The scholarly commitment to maintaining classical learning didn't emerge only from Christian impulse, but from monastic preservation of Druidic teaching methods. The same memory techniques that preserved Celtic genealogies now preserved Latin texts. The same consciousness training that activated Druidic knowledge now activated Christian theology. The technology of consciousness remained constant. The content shifted. Illuminated manuscripts revealed Druidic symbols incorporated into Christian art, spirals and knotwork, cosmic patterns, the visual language of pre-Christian spirituality, expressing Christian content. The artistic continuity suggests institutional intentionality. Monks deliberately preserved the symbolic vocabulary while Christianizing the theological content. The Philid poet-seers inherited the Druids' social functions explicitly, maintained supernatural authority while nominally Christian. The legal power to destroy through satire continued under Christian authority. The capacity to grant immortal fame persisted. The role transformed, but the function remained. St. Patrick's breastplate, the protective prayer attributed to Ireland's patron saint, uses formulae recognizably Druidic. The invocation of divine powers, the specific ritual language, the protection structure matching pre-Christian magical practice, a Christian prayer using pagan consciousness technology. The continuity was so seamless that Christian authorities either didn't notice or didn't care to suppress what was thoroughly Christianized in vocabulary despite being Druidic in structure. The power of bards and satirists in Celtic society was so great that satire could literally kill. The bard's verse didn't just damage reputation, created physical manifestation. Blotches appeared on the victim's face, shame, blemish, and disgrace, 3 blotches whose appearance rendered them unfit to rule. Kings had to abdicate, warriors lost status. The satire wasn't metaphorical curse, was understood as genuine magical effect. A bard's single verse could kill more surely than poison a euro, causing faces to erupt in boils, crops to fail, and honourable men to die of shame. The training to achieve such power was extraordinary. 12 years minimum, memorizing genealogies spanning centuries, histories of kingdoms, the precise formulations that could create or destroy reputations. The apprentice learned not just words but consciousness states, enabling the verse to carry genuine power. The training produced individuals whose utterances reshared reality through psychic force. The legal texts explicitly recognize satire's authority. Unlawful satire brought consequences to the poet themselves. Their own face could blister if the satire was unjustified. But justified satire was considered legal execution, more effective than swords because the victim died from internal consequence, not external violence. The system created extraordinary accountability. The bard had to be absolutely certain of the truth before speaking satire. The consequences of error were severe. Bards functioned as international diplomats, travelling freely between warring territories under sacred protection. The bard could go anywhere, speak to anyone. Sacred status made them untouchable even between enemies. The tradition created pressure toward peace through intermediaries who couldn't be harmed. Later European culture would echo this in the concept of diplomats' diplomatic immunity. The poetic forms themselves were technical achievements. Praise poems, ensuring victory in battle. Genealogical poems establishing legal claims. Prophecy poems shaping future events. Each form carried specific power, composed according to strict rules, delivered with precision. The art was technology. The creativity involved mastering profound technical difficulty. The Celtic capacity to preserve civilization-spanning knowledge, without written records, depended on sophisticated memory techniques that modern research is only beginning to validate. The Dinsenkar's place law created mental mapping, where information attached to geographical features. The bard travelled mentally through Ireland, and each location triggered associated knowledge clusters. In the mind of a master bard existed an invisible Ireland, where every hill and stream contained libraries worth of wisdom, accessible through mental travel. The Tyne, the great epic, required 12 hours to recite completely. The performer needed not script but memorization, thousands of verses, complex narrative, precise genealogies, all held in consciousness. The technique for achieving this transcended mere memorization. The bard trained consciousness to achieve specific states where memory operated at extraordinary capacity. The compression techniques used pattern and rhythm to encode information densely. Alliteration patterns, syllable counts, metrical structures. These weren't mere ornaments, but technical mechanisms for fixing information in memory. Randomness would be forgotten. Pattern anchored to mind. The verse achieved perfect compression. Complete information expressed in minimum words. The form became mnemonic device, ensuring accurate transmission across generations. Modern memory champions using ancient techniques validate the Celtic accomplishment. Trained practitioners memorizing thousands of random digits, complex information structures. Modern science provides tools for understanding what ancients accomplished intuitively. The capacity was real. The training was systematic. The results were reproducible by anyone willing to undergo the discipline. The monastery's introduction of writing paradoxically preserved oral tradition by freezing dynamic traditions into fixed forms. The monks wrote down the stories. What was alive and changing in oral tradition became fixed text. For preservation, this was valuable. For understanding the living tradition, it meant capturing only snapshots of what was continuous evolution. The written texts tell us what was remembered. Don't tell us how transmission actually occurred in living context. The memory tradition influenced medieval European culture profoundly. The art of memory, the method of loci preserved in classical texts and revived in Renaissance. The Irish contribution was to recognize that landscape itself could serve as memory device. Walking through Ireland meant walking through history. Every place triggered associated narratives. The entire society was organized as mnemonic device. Information wasn't stored in external medium, but in the land itself. Ireland itself is a book written in stone and stream, where those who know the language can still read messages the Druids encoded in the very bones of the earth. The sacred geography persists, despite centuries of overlay. Christian churches built on ancient sacred sites inherit the sanctity. Holy wells replacing pagan springs continue to draw pilgrims. The landscape remembers what institutional religion attempted to erase. Every significant geographical feature contains layers of meaning. Mountains are sleeping gods. Rivers flow as goddess bodies through the land. Lakes are gateways to the otherworld. The bog itself, those vast waterlogged expanses covering portions of Ireland, represents liminal space, where material and spiritual interpenetrate. Objects deposited in bogs preserve unchanged for centuries. The bog preserves what ordinary earth destroys. Sacred deposits made in ancient times emerge unchanged thousands of years later. The bog functions as archaeological time capsule, but also as sacred preserve. The boundary between worlds. Certain locations maintain reputations as thin places where worlds intersect. Newgrange, the massive Stone Age passage tomb, aligns precisely with winter solstice sunrise. Skellig Michael, the remote island monastery founded by early Christian monks, rises dramatically from the Atlantic. The hill of Tara, where kings were inaugurated, commands the central plain. Modern pilgrims continue visiting these sites, drawn by something that transcends historical knowledge. The places themselves generate effects. Consciousness shifts. Time feels different. The boundary between visible and invisible thins. The concept of thin places Ceol Ait persists in contemporary Irish consciousness despite secularization. People speak of specific locations as spiritually active, report unusual experiences there. The accumulated belief across centuries suggests something genuine beyond folklore. Perhaps subtle environmental factors. Perhaps genuine locations where geographic features facilitate altered consciousness. Perhaps the concentrated intention of centuries of believers actually creates perceptual effects. The mechanism remains unclear. The phenomenon persists. Place names preserve ancient knowledge explicitly. Thousands of Irish locations named after gods, heroes, and mythological events. The geography is simultaneously practical landscape and mythology written in toponymy. The names serve mnemonic function. Traveling through Ireland means traveling through mythology. Every location triggers associated narratives. The entire island functions as memory palace. Information isn't stored in texts, but in the land itself. Anyone familiar with the tradition can access stored knowledge by physically presence at the appropriate location. The sacred wells, holy wells, continue drawing pilgrims despite secularization. Christian tradition explains them as saint-associated, but archaeological evidence suggests pre-Christian origins. The water allegedly holds healing properties. Modern analysis finds mineral compositions that might produce genuine health effects, but the healing seems to exceed what chemistry explains. The ritual, the belief, the intentional pilgrimage to sacred location all participate in creating results that defied categorization. Archaeological surveys continue revealing new sacred sites, standing stones in unexpected locations, ritual deposits in caves, astronomical alignments visible only through modern analysis. The sacred geography is gradually becoming visible again. The landscape's intentional encoding recovers itself through patient investigation. The Druids created sacred geography that persisted through centuries of attempted erasure. The land itself maintains the record. The messages remain in stone and soil and water for those with patience to decipher them. In Celtic time, Cuchulainn still guards Ulster's borders, Fionn still sleeps awaiting Ireland's greatest need, and every sunrise potentially begins the world anew. The Celtic understanding of time differs radically from linear progression. Past, present, and future interpenetrate. Mythological events replay annually. Ancient patterns cycle through eternal return. What was lost returns. What seems ended continues. Heroes dormant can wake. Gods withdrawn can manifest. The eightfold Celtic year creates temporal portals where mythological events become present again. Samhain returns annually. The Otherworld invades. The dead walk. Every year, at the same moment, reality reconfigures. The boundary dissolves. The calendar itself becomes technology for maintaining conscious connection with cosmic cycles. Living through the year means experiencing the same spiritual transitions that ancestors experienced. The pattern remains constant, individual years vary, but the structure endures. The concept of the time between times, the moments at seasonal transitions and daily thresholds, persists even in secularized Celtic consciousness. Dawn and dusk possess different quality than midday. Transition seasons feel liminal. The boundaries between times possess spiritual significance. This isn't superstition, but recognition of genuine phenomenological differences. Consciousness operates differently during transitions. Attention shifts naturally. The perceptual filters thin. The otherworld feels closer. The Tuatha De Danann sleep waiting for Ireland's greatest need. Fionn Mac Cumhaill remains in Tir na Nog, available if summoned. The heroes haven't died but entered dormancy. The pattern enables eternal return. The story can continue. The golden age can be restored. The archetype of the sleeping king persists across European culture. Arthur, waiting in Avalon, Charlemagne beneath the mountain. The myth encodes the conviction that what was lost remains retrievable. That dormancy isn't death, that heroes return. The cyclical understanding prevents the despair that linear thinking can create. In linear time, the past is finished, lost forever. In cyclical time, the past cycles back. repeats with variations. What was once will be again. The patterns endure. Individual expressions change. The underlying structure persists. This offers strange comfort. Nothing is truly new. Everything essential returns. The wheel turns and brings the same seasons, the same challenges, the same opportunities again. Modern consciousness structured around linear time often experiences anxiety about irreversible loss. The Celtic cyclical understanding offers different psychological space. What disappears will return. What seems dead awakens. The land remembers. The stories persist. The knowledge survives in forms we might not immediately recognize. But if we attend carefully, the patterns reveal themselves again. The cycles that seemed lost continue operating. The story never truly ends, just transforms. The prophecy system in Celtic tradition depends on this cyclical understanding. The future can be known because patterns repeat. If you understand the pattern, you can perceive what will recur. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling, not through magical causation, but through recognition of repeating patterns. The wise person sees the pattern and acts accordingly. The action seems to fulfill prophecy, but actually represents conscious alignment with naturally recurring cycles. The Druids' greatest magic was ensuring their tradition would survive even its own apparent destruction, hidden in plain sight within the modern world. The wisdom didn't disappear, transformed, adapted, survived by becoming unrecognizable to those searching for it in old forms. The tradition lives in ways contemporary practitioners often don't recognize they're participating in something ancient. Irish storytelling continues despite formal education systems emphasizing literacy. Elderly people still gather to tell stories. The oral tradition persists as cultural practice. The stories themselves maintain continuity. Genealogies still claimed. Place lore still transmitted. The consciousness state required for transmitting complex narratives remains active in cultural memory. Young people learning from elders receive not just stories but consciousness techniques for holding vast information patterns. Traditional Irish music carries druidic sound mysteries encoded in melody. Specific tunes for healing. Music that induces trance states. The folk knowledge preserves what concert halls forgot. Musicians trained in traditional forms develop consciousness states, enabling complex improvisation. The musical modes themselves seem to activate specific brain states. The tradition continues because it works. The experience validates the practice. No one needs explicit understanding of why the music heals. The effect speaks for itself. Contemporary Celtic spirituality groups attempt to reconstruct Druidic practice using archaeology, folklore, and comparative mythology. The reconstruction can never be complete. The living oral tradition is lost, but the attempt to rebuild the practice suggests hunger for the wisdom. Modern people seeking meaning find something genuine in reconstructed traditions. Whether historically accurate or not, the practice works. It provides structure for spiritual seeking. It offers community. It reconnects practitioners with land and ancient patterns. The Irish language itself carries Celtic consciousness patterns that English cannot express. The concepts of Geasa, Dan, and Firin encode worldview. The language's structure preserves philosophical commitments of Celtic civilization. Speaking Irish, even modern Irish, activates consciousness patterns inherited from pre-Christian consciousness. The language maintenance becomes not mere cultural preservation, but actual preservation of consciousness technologies. The words carry frequencies. The grammatical structures encode relationships between self and world, human and nature, visible and invisible. Celtic wisdom influences global culture through literature, film, and gaming, often without explicit recognition. Millions of people encounter Druidic concepts through popular media. Fantasy novels draw on Celtic mythology. Games explore similar narrative patterns. The ideas penetrate culture quietly. People absorb concepts without recognizing their origin. The tradition survives because it expresses genuine truths. The hunger for these truths persists across centuries and cultures. Scientific research increasingly validates Celtic practices. Forest bathing, spending time in forests, improves health and reduces stress. The Druidic understanding that dwelling in trees provides healing proves correct. Sacred sites show electromagnetic anomalies. Traditional agricultural methods prove ecologically superior to industrial approaches. The ancient knowledge, tested through centuries of practice, contains genuine wisdom that modern science validates after the fact. The tradition hasn't died, has transformed continuously, survives through adaptation. The core remains constant, the forms shift. The Druids' consciousness open to nature, perceiving hidden dimensions, maintaining relationship with land and Otherworld persists in modern practitioners. The robes and titles changed. The consciousness remains accessible. The technology works across centuries and contexts. The tradition endures. The final secret of the Druids may be that there is no final secret, only an endless spiral of deepening mystery that transforms all who pursue it. The Celtic tradition deliberately maintains ambiguity, shape-shifting beings, multiple simultaneous truths, paradoxes that rational mind cannot resolve. Confusion serves pedagogical purpose, forces consciousness beyond rational limitation into spaces where mystery enriches rather than frustrates. Every answered question opens deeper mysteries. Archaeological discoveries raise more puzzles than they solve. Translated texts reveal greater complexity underlying surface meaning. Recovered traditions point toward depths still lost. The investigation never concludes. The pursuit itself transforms the pursuer. The seeker becomes different through seeking. The destination matters less than the journey toward it. Contemporary practitioners claiming direct otherworld contact present experiences that cannot be proven or disproven. Encounters existing in permanent liminal space. The events seem real to the experiencer, cannot be scientifically validated. Yet, the consistency of reports across centuries and cultures suggests something genuine, not necessarily literal, otherworld in objective sense, but genuine non-ordinary consciousness states providing access to knowledge and experience exceeding normal perception. Celtic wisdom resists systematization, remains fluid, contextual, alive. Every generation reinterprets the tradition, finds new meanings in old stories, adapts ancient patterns to contemporary concerns. The flexibility enables survival. A rigid doctrine gets exposed as false or outdated. A living tradition transforms continuously, remains relevant, speaks to each generation's deepest questions. The ultimate Druidic teaching might be that not knowing becomes its own form of knowledge. The questions matter more than answers. The process transforms consciousness more than conclusions. The mystery itself is the teaching. To pursue the mystery requires developing consciousness capable of perceiving what rational mind alone cannot access. The pursuit develops the perceiver. The temples are gone, the priests are dust, the written records largely destroyed, yet something persists, not as external institution but as possibility residing in human consciousness. The capacity to perceive otherworld, to recognize sacred geography, to hear meaning in words spoken ritually, to feel connection with land and ancestors. These capacities haven't disappeared, sleep dormant in contemporary consciousness. Awakening requires proper approach, training, dedication, transformation. The mist that rises from Irish waters remains impenetrable. The landscape never fully reveals itself. The mystery persists. The ancient wisdom whispers through modern life in forms we often don't recognize. The Druids encoded their teachings so thoroughly that centuries of attempted erasure couldn't destroy them. The knowledge moved from external institutions into consciousness itself, into landscape and language and story and music, into the bodies and minds of people who continue practices without always understanding their origin. The documentary concludes not with resolution, but with acknowledgement of permanent mystery. The Celtic worldview accepts that some questions have no answers, some truths cannot be stated directly. The unspeakable remains precious, the hidden remains valuable. The mystery itself is the treasure. The search for Celtic wisdom doesn't end in knowledge, but in transformed consciousness. The seeker becomes different through seeking, returns to ordinary world carrying something ineffable, cannot quite be explained, can only be lived and gradually understood through years of patient attention. The mist never fully clears, the mystery never resolves completely, and this perhaps was always the point, to maintain consciousness open to perpetual mystery. To live constantly aware that the visible world conceals hidden dimensions, to act as if the gods still watch, to speak as if words carry power, to move through landscape as sacred text, to remember that death isn't ending but transition, to accept that we are haunted by voices speaking in mist, and to let that haunting transform us.